Now, this is a very intriguing score, and it's got a lot of really great things to it. There are a few things I think, that maybe a few strategies get used, several times. Maybe they don't, maybe it's too much of the same thing at times. But in and of themselves, certain gestures are really lovely and often very convincing. Now, this was, there's a little note that talked about how, Andrew, that you didn't consider this to be any kind of attempt to sound like Beethoven. And, there's all the same, there's a lot of, there's a lot of really nice Beethoven-like feel that runs through this. And, just in case people are wondering what Lily Pond looks like, I feel that this is a really strong example. It's just a very beautiful score. I feel you could have upped the staff size on this. It looks like it's about maybe 4.5 or something. I think you could have gone up to 5.1 because you don't really have all that many instruments going on at the same time, right? So it just makes it easier for everybody to read. But you might be saying, no, it is 5.1, but then according to other factors, it might end up still being smaller than other scores. So, but you might have even have taken it all the way up to like 6 points or something. Readability is really key with these for my process here. So I started this evaluation and I didn't have my other screen set up, so that is why my voice is sounding a little strange. So let me really quickly do that. Yeah, but I just got so I've been studying this score for the past few days as I prep other materials and other videos, and I was taking one last look, and I was just so fascinating. I forgot to set everything else up. Okay, so anyhow, back to our evaluation. Let's just really play by the rules and stick to the criteria and so on, but just acknowledging that I feel that you did a really great job, and it just had some very interesting factors to it. Okay, so the first question is, intro setting mood effectively, question mark. I think that it's done very, very nicely. Now, you're not trying to have any kind of performance practice at all. Like you're not trying to sound period or anything like that. And if that being the case, I think this easily could have been scored as in the correct pitch order. So in other words, the little harmonization here under the first horn part could have been given to the third horn, and then this lower middle part could have been given to the second, and so on. Do you see what I mean? And this low C here, you've got the sort of bass clef stuff, and that's totally unnecessary. The whole thing could have been done in treble clef. Even this low C kind of hanging on there in the bottom could have been scored in ledger lines below the staff. That's kind of strange. My mouse pointer wants to tell us the name of the file. Okay, so that's all good. So anyway, there's a couple other little things too. Like for instance, this could have just been a quarter rest with a fermata over it, right? Just anything that was a quarter rest's length could have just had a fermata over that, and then adding the fermata over the eighth only when you had notes preceding it, right? So in this case, and in the case of the second clarinet. But I mean, all that's fine. Maybe you had to do that in order to get the to get the mock-up to work correctly. All right, so let's look at the orchestration itself. So, I mean, the first thing that you do here is you have flute over horns. Okay. Now, the horns in your mock-up are actually more like pianissimo than they are piano, and I'm wondering whether or not you just had the mix like pulled down or on this particular section, or if you had some way of balancing them moment to moment throughout the score rather than globally, because this really is like with your first horn going all the way up to F. By the time it gets to this F, it may have the horn player controlling it down to what is piano according to what the horns register is, but it will still have a tendency to shout over what the oboe is playing here, right? It won't be the smooth kind of dovetailing that you have got scored here. So it's really kind of safer in these situations, especially with flute over the top, to mark this, say, pianissimo, right? Because the flute will, being in its middle register, is incredibly vulnerable to kind of a penetrating sound from below on the horns, and then the oboe just coming in right over the top in terms of dovetailing, and then of course the other parts dovetailing into the clarinets. They'll be just once the horns stop, there will be a sudden loss of energy, which makes this a very uneasy kind of transition, right? It won't be seamless at all. It'll be very steamy, right? So the horns, the simple solution is to have the horns be extra soft, and I would say that, like in general, like the slurring should match throughout, right? So I would slur here, and then I would also like maybe you could slur from the first beat to the half bar right here, So da 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 da. Do you know what I mean? I think that gives it more energy going into the third bar. So I mean, but we still haven't answered the question: does this set the mood effectively for what you've got coming up? And I would say it does beautifully so, because this really has a lot of your approach kind of tied up in it for, I would say, for better or worse, right? And I don't want to say that certain things are wrong or worse or so on, but like as I said at the beginning of this evaluation, there are certain strategies that you rely on, and while each in and of themselves is very effective and cool sounding, the question is that continuing to use them several times in a row may really call attention to them. One of those is having like an unfinished flute line, right? So you have this beautiful, it reaches upwards, and then the horns come under from below, and then the oboe comes in. That's really beautiful, right? So we don't mind so much that the flute has just stopped. Okay, but then you do it again and again, and I mean, to a degree, again here, although there's a sense of connection here to the strings, and you have some other contrasts going on, so it's not so, yeah, but then, yeah, in a couple other places, yeah, right, for instance here. So there's a sense of, there's that sense of, little incomplete flute snippets. So I think you have to watch out for that. So if that's just a feature of your style, if that's one part of your signature, I can't fault it, right? But yeah. All right. So all that said, really nice intro. Okay. So now going to Allegro non troppo. Your tempos are good in your mock-up, but you should tell us, what they are in your score. I think it just is helpful to everybody else. A few little cautions here. If you're going to go down, up, down, then I think that you should divide this bar just like you did this one. Like up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. Because like here, like you are forcing the player to have a long bow on the downbeat, and then a slower bow on the up bow here, right? So like it's up, down, You see what I mean? So it's just a little uneven in terms of strength. And everywhere else, you just have these nice long bows in your other string parts, right? So it's just, yeah, just try to have like equal length bow when you are planning out your slurs, unless there's some real, overriding interest in terms of the phrasing, what you're trying to say. So here's another little thing here. I really, really love the way that you do these little offbeats. I think I did something similar in a different way, but I did have some little offbeats to sort of help to regulate the sense of flow. One little recommendation would be to possibly score this portato. Just put a slur over it. It's kind of like a semi portato, or like add the tenuto mark, so it's kind of it's all under one bow, and it gives a nice pulsing sound, and that blends in beautifully with all the slurring, the beautiful long slurs that you've got in all the other parts, right? Okay, so with maybe a couple tiny little fixes like that, I would say that would get you the natural flow that you need at the beginning. Does your melody start with elegance? I think it's beautifully done, right? As much as you are not necessarily trying to sound like Beethoven, it's not completely out of his style book, right? If he had one, to start with the main theme in first violins, right? Just that's like so standard, right? Like, for instance, the Sixth Symphony, right, which I was using as an example of Beethoven's style. So yeah, and I like the push that you've got right in here, natural transition to octaves. You've got it all built into your accompaniment, and you expand without clogging up. I really love this nice long drone here in the cellos, and just a little, last three little thumps on the timpani. So that for me, I feel it's a beautifully crafted opening statement. Now, I'm not so sure about this pattern of tonguing. Ta 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 ta. Ta 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 ta. Right? It just seems a little fussy, right? I mean, it almost feels like ta 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 is easier, or ta ta ta. But I mean, if it's what you feel, it's not wrong or anything. But it's still just a little. It's not quite as natural to the tongue as all or nothing. But it is kind of beautiful the way you've put this together. This is taking us to our next set of criteria, right? So, contrast with theme, contrast between lines, harmonic support needed, and so on. The harmonic support, I really love this downward walking line here in your pizzicato basses. It's so simple and so effective. It's one of the strongest examples of harmonic support that I've seen in any of these entries. So really good work on that. It's an interesting way that you've set this up. I think that the slurring pattern should match whatever you end up on, right? So rather, if you're going to go ta 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 ta, up down up, or down up down up down. Sorry, I'm kind of thinking backwards. Down up down up down. Then I think this has got to be ta 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 ta. I think that they should match, right? Rather than having a slur here and none there. I think that they should really be locked together. And also, there is zero reason for you to have removed the words leggermente, right, from the that were in the original score. I think that it's while you will get a similar feeling from your mock-up. Leggermente is as much of an attitude as it is just a description of what the notes are doing, right? So it will give the players a little bit more lift and a little bit more incisiveness, right? It's to be nimble as possible. So if they are all playing together very nimbly, then I think it expresses something emotionally here that it otherwise would be absent. I've sort of likened this opening to sort of, Beethoven composing himself as he's about to take a walk out in the country, and he gets out into the country here with his main theme, and he's just really having a great time. And then he runs across like some villager or some traveler on the road who is, just makes him laugh because they're just somewhat silly, right? Or he sees something that makes him smile, right? So this has to kind of have that sort of fresh, dancey sort of feel. So don't leave out the leggermente. So in terms of contrast with the theme, I think that's also beautifully done, because here we get the first clarinet finally speaking in its own voice, and then the strings come in, and the merging together of the two voices is beautifully done. So it's the strings will definitely, the strings won't be backseat to the clarinets just coloring them. There will be a definite progression of the color here. And then you do it again, right? But then adding a little bit of flute on top, right? Once again, incomplete. Are we attracting too much attention to the flute doing this all the time? But here, it works for its own sake. And then, just like C, da 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 da, B flat, right? A, da 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 da, A. So just beautiful planning, simple, works great. So that ticks a lot of boxes. Now, next question. Emphatic color of line. Do you maintain strength or not? Do you set up things like your harmonic density? Here you choose to harmonize things a little bit more extremely than they are in the piano part, and in a lot of ways you subvert what is going on there, because it takes the stress away from the that whole idea of the B flat, like its function right in there, right? So by giving it away here, harmonizing on the way down, and then coming out of it with just like a pure C major chord right in here, and putting the B flat on the bottom there, it's not the same thing, right? In terms of the timing and the delivery and so on. But it's still really, really fun. And I really like this little bit of flute right in here. Standing on its own, it works really great. And I really like pushing forwards to the mezzo forte and then piano suddenly. So I think you should just say, even though it's completely obvious that this is piano subito, I think you should still put that in there, because the players will be thinking ahead to that moment. And they just really see the cutoff, and they can actually make that work more dramatically. It's the same thing as adding the word leggermente here, even though you would think, well, in order to execute this at allegro non troppo 16th notes and everybody working together in this phrasing, of course it's going to be leggermente. Why do I even need to say it? But it's a psychological factor for the players, right? Just as it is in the piano score. And then, same thing here, by saying piano subito, it sets up the player to just really bring that down. And it's almost like as if to say that a piano subito reality in a score, because of the markings such as this, is slightly different psychologically than when you actually mark the subito, right? Because it's almost like the conductor may choose to place the downbeat here rather than just running right into it, right? So that there's just a teeny bit of a lift before the piano, and that helps to accentuate the fact that it's suddenly softer, right? Well, going on here, this is all very cool. I think that the fact that you use a little bit of flute here, once again, distracts from the fact that it's just sort of strings going on and on and on, right? With a little bit of winds right in the middle here, and then you're going to trade off between your contrasts. Once again, like this could all be in treble clef, and you could have these two voices here. The what you're giving to the second part is really much more the province of the third in a 4-part harmony like this, right? All right, and then I really love the all soft strings, mezzo forte horns answering, soft strings again, mezzo forte, and I really also love the contrast between the beautifully smooth string phrasing here, and just this nice separated little notes, right? And then just a little touch, boom, rather than just ending on the horns. It's really, really nice, just like dramatically. There's a lot of stuff that works in here. All right, and that just takes us to our section B. Uh, and here, I really love this dovetailing. Da 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 da. With the oboe taking over for the clarinet. And this is something that I can't remember if it was you or another entrant to the challenge who had commented under my clarinet plus oboe video. But somebody, I can't remember, but I think somebody commented on it on one of my, I don't know if it was under the video or if it was in another place that I posted it. But I think they said something like, "Oh yeah, I did like a kind of a dovetailing from a tied note from one voice to the other, and I thought it was really effective. And so I wish that I'd seen this video beforehand, right? Which came along at the beginning of this year. So here I think that everything is working great, except I would have a diminuendo here on the clarinet part as it pushes through, like so, just so that the voice really, really seamlessly comes out of it. Because otherwise, I mean, what you are kind of relying on here is that the oboe will be so pungent that it doesn't really matter that the clarinet part is just ending without a diminuendo, right? And the natural rounding off of the notes, there is a slight diminuendo anyways, but I think that you could just ensure, just to put a little bit of a hairpin going out of it, right? So that the one timbre really, really mutates into the other. And as to, a complementary timbre, you can't beat soft horns under oboes. In this case, it's because you're keeping your horns at piano, even though they're kind of going all the way up to an F there on the top. The fact that you're pushing forwards to a forte in the middle here counts for a lot. But I would take away the accent, because that will have a little too much bite for the close proximity to your oboe here. Okay, now here we get into what I feel is like possibly just like one of the most clever sections of your entry, and a just beautiful, creative ideas in here that I haven't seen in other scores. I mean, other scores also, of course, also have their own strengths. I think that if I were going to indicate staccato on a dotted rhythm like this, I would just have I would have them both be like a 16th value or maybe an 8th value on this one rather than do you know what I mean? Because like you're almost, it's as much as just scoring 16th notes with with two 16ths in the middle. I mean, it just feels a little. It feels a little weird the way that it is. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it per se. It just feels a little sloppy to me, just to be in my purist phase. All right. So with this dovetailing, I would almost prefer you to not do this, and to have your little groups in your first and second violins as being a full 16th ending with the dovetailing note at the beginning of the next group, right? So da 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 da, because this is really, really tricky. Da 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 ba ba da 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 da. Do you see what I'm saying? Like it's like really, really better for the dovetailing to really happen on the beat, right? Because it just that way that the two sets of players are really locked in to the baton, right? Whereas with this, where they're constantly anticipating when they come in. Now that is not to say that really, really great players could not play this right on the nose, but it's just an extra. You're just asking them to do something extra on top of everything else they need to think about, right? So the more than we can minimize those kinds of extra burdens, then I think the better. Yes, like for instance, this is just like completely unnecessary. You should try to plan it out so that one, like if you're going to have the firsts do this, then the second should be going da 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 bum, right? And then da 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 da. It's just so much more natural. Okay, and then this is really nice. Da 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 da. The bum ba bum ba bum ba bum. I think that's really great. Now here you're sort of doing this whole thing where you've got the flutes kind of working as the punctuating instrument against the pattern in the violins, and I think that that's really nicely done. Then you have your first violin take over, and you're kind of going back and forth between these two elements. Here, this is one thing where I didn't feel that where I felt that the flute just sort of dropping off into nothing wasn't necessarily calling too much attention to itself. It was just in the spectrum of it happening in a lot of other places that I think you just have to watch out, right? Okay, so but it's a nice way of interpreting the pattern. And like you can also simplify some of these by having it end on an eighth note with a staccato, da 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 da, and then you get rid of the rest, which is just clutters up things horizontally. But I think that the smartest and coolest and funnest little thing here was these little back and forth things, these little fingered tremolos in clarinet. Even with something like this, where maybe it doesn't really matter if you remember to mark first player, second player, and so on, divisi, unison in your strings and so on. It's just a good discipline to try to get that. Do you know what I'm saying? Just so try to remember to do that next time. I don't know. I hate to do it, but I think we're heading towards a checklist. So if I ever come back to this, I might just say if I ever, because there's half of me that just really wants to do this again as soon as I can, but there's a part of me that has to judge whether or not my health is going to get better. But I think we're headed toward some kind of checklist. Just really make sure that you look after these things, because you never know where a score like this is going to end up. You might, like, somebody who knows you might see that you participated in this and say, well, look, I've got this little orchestra, we'd love to try it out. It looks like a fun little project for us to do. So yeah, anyways, but like then going into this harmonized, kind of reverse harmonized part right in here, I thought that was just the coolest part of all. And then just like how everything else worked together. So you just very gently addressed the whole question of widening, thinking ahead to widening the gap and so on, and you didn't really let it worry you too much, because you had all these other delicate delicate elements you wanted to incorporate, just the touch of oboe and flute here and there, and the little warbling clarinets, and this little glockenspiel, which I thought was just intensely adorable. So by holding off a little bit before a really big expansion, I think that was very wise. Now, right in here, I think you need some support on the viola trills. I think they just really get swallowed up by the expanding horns and the rolling timpani, the crescendo rolling timpani. So I think that this might really get stomped on by everybody else. So I would say, like, at least maybe double with bassoon, since your bassoons aren't doing it, or maybe clarinet. Right, those would both be really effective in helping out your violas here. And it's interesting how really, like when things get really big before C, you just really don't bring in your wind section at all, like, and you just really make it about the winds and the horns, and yet you have a nice beefy sound, and you don't even throw the trumpet in there. So it feels to me like there's a part of that, when I look at that, I almost think this feels still like it's in a sketch mode to a certain extent. And that there's more that you could do with it. Say you did decide to, get it ready for, a reading or a performance. Who knows? I mean, it's just so fun. There's a few things I really think that you should try to normalize. Like, if everybody's going to be slurring a certain way in your horns, except for your first, I think your first should slur the same way as everybody else, and so on. And once again, like imagine if you had your first and second going da 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 da, right, and then your third and fourth playing this harmony alongside it. It just makes much more sense, right? Because you get the octaves with the first and second sitting next to each other, and you get the little harmony part with the third and the fourth, and with the third putting the little harmonic note in between the first and second, right? So the roles of these players are much more important. And then right in here, just try to have everybody slur the same way, I would say. I mean, this is not, I could see. Yeah, the slur there, and then going to a portato and so on. Yeah. Okay. So now we're going to our little C section, right? And we have the clarinets talking to each other, and then the oboe and the flute, right? And just kind of everything kind of jumping around up higher and then down lower and so on. And then kind of repeating the same strategy. And I really love the way that the horns and the strings come in here very powerfully. Did you notice that you barely hear the glockenspiel here? But I mean, you do hear a little bit of sweetening. I don't think there's any need here to bring to mark the dynamic of the glockenspiel up a little bit, but it might end up happening in rehearsal. But I don't know. I don't think you have to put it into the score. Yeah, and then just that's these little written D's. D. I thought this was all particularly strong and very fun. Okay, but one thing I feel that is that you might be thinking, oh, I don't want to, I don't want to have so much of that run in my bassoon because I'm afraid that like they'll sort of run out of breath or like it'll be hard and so. But I have to tell you that just doing these eighths the way that you've scored them, that distracts away from the kind of rippling running pattern. All of these just really the ear of the listener will be listening to these eighths and they won't be listening to this running pattern anymore. So if your intent was to have this kind of be kind of a little backgroundy and supportive of the of this pattern in here and not to put the bassoonist to too much trouble, it's actually you're putting the listener to more trouble here. Have the bassoonist go ahead and double these parts if that is what you intend for that. Right? But I would say like it's almost no sense in bringing in the bassoon at all unless you can continue on with the pattern. Like maybe, and let's see. I just want to jump up here. Yeah, so you have a single bassoon. So you could possibly trade off with clarinet on some of the higher notes, as things get above, get from D and then kind of run back down and so on. Maybe you could do some kind of dovetailing with second clarinet or something. Or maybe just put in another bassoon. Almost every orchestra has two bassoons, even like a small orchestra. And you could just dovetail between the two. Or you could just have a bassoonist just play this entire thing. Right? Have one bassoonist play the whole thing and don't worry about it so much. You could have them. You could even, have them going da 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 da. You see what I'm saying? Like that would work also fine in thickening up what the cellos are doing here. Okay. And then you lead back, da 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 ba 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 ba. I feel it's beautifully seamless right in here. Yeah. And then since you have a slightly different approach here to the way that the melody is happens, you move your repeat back further, and that's totally fine. Yeah, and then right in here, going into D, this should just be 16th notes, doing what the cello's doing, because this is just really distracting. It's just better than da 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 da. The audience has stopped listening to this and they're starting to listen to this now, right? And that's not what you want, I don't think. Okay, so we will come back to D, but first let's take a look at the E section to see how you scored the recapitulation. Now there's one little note here before we really jump into the analysis from E, and that is just to observe something about your piccolo part. You were sort of noting that the piccolo part could be played by by the flute player, and that indeed like a lot of it could just be played on flute rather than on piccolo. And just kind of a quick observation jumping back, I think it would be harder to get like a really kind of soft B flat and A up here. It would just it would be for the flute player. It's like once you're just really getting up to B flat, it becomes harder and harder to control just to get that very fine dynamic down to piano the way that a piccolo can. And there certainly is, there's definitely enough time to switch back and forth between your flute and piccolo here. But then I would say, like, jumping forwards here, that's really not very much time. It's doable, but it's just not very, it's just not too convenient. Here's where I think that this could be played just on flute. Just keep this on flute. There's really no need for this to be necessarily played on piccolo. All right, I think you can get a soft enough G for this to all work together. Maybe you lose a little bit of that incredible crispness that piccolo has. Okay, so just kind of taking it from the 2 bars before E. So we're ending with this massive C chord as we push back towards F, and then stay with F, right? As all of the there's the main themes, the first, second, and third theme are all restated. Yeah. But the only thing here is, like, I feel that, like, you just really keep the rhythm going. You don't really come to an end here, this, like, really, like, it's just there. You don't allow the music to kind of come to a resting point, right, at all, from which you can continue on. So I would say that, like, maybe there's, like, just kind of check your sense of drama here and see whether or not you really need things to continue on certain rhythms and in certain kinds of gestures. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, there are 1 or 2 little things we could pick at when we come back around, but it's like there's nothing fatally wrong here. Okay, it's just does this. Are we also robbing the whole sense of da 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 bomb, that kind of inevitability, by having it pre-introduced the bar before, right? So yeah. Anyways, but all that said, especially the last bar going into E, I think that all works great. And here you've opted to go for kind of just almost a complete restatement of exactly what you did before. You got your timpani and this bonk, 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 and this is slightly different, I think. Unison here and so on. But same things as before. Make the bowing more regular. Maybe turn this into portato and so on. Yeah. And you do the same adjustments to the harmony here and so on. So, it can't fault you there, right? It may work before, it'll work again, but you just have to think, do I want it to work the same exact time 4 times in a row, right? So, like it will be played at the beginning of the orchestration, and then on the repeat of the orchestration, and then it will be played in the middle of the second part, the second half, and then it'll be played again when on that same repeat. So that's 4 times in a row, right? So do we always want it to be the same each time? That's always just for the orchestrator to answer. And then we're back to here. Leggermente should be back in here, and you have this bum 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 bum. So, like, this is nice. Like, you sort of take it up a little bit and just take it up 1 step, just as the little leggermente patterning is as well. And which you should, once again, use the leggermente word on the 16th note patterning. And, this is lovely. This is pretty much what you did before, right? And then kind of the same thing, kind of everything kind of cranked up by a whole step. And you add a little bit of stuff in here to kind of help out with the horns and so on. So, I mean, that's really kind of fun. I actually love the way that you add the horns here. And, once again, I think, I don't know if I really like the way that you got mezzo forte suddenly here on the oboe part, right? I mean, why does it need to be all that much louder? I think everybody should just be piano, and maybe the horns could be pianissimo with marked staccato. All right, so, that just takes us to, the next part. Do we have increased dynamic impact here on the da 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 da? And we do to a certain degree. I really love the way that you have these split off in contrary motion, and then end up in octaves and so on. That's very, very cool. I almost wish that you could have done that divisi, like maybe the second violin part could have been divisi with the violas, and then this could have strengthened what was happening in the flutes and so on. Do you know what I mean? It just, yeah. And that would help keep this trumpet part here from being so incredibly strident, right? If there was a little bit of cushioning on top of the strings, because you really can hear. I mean, if there's one drawback to this, is the changing role of the trumpet. Okay, and the reason why is like you keep changing where it shows up. Now, bum bum bum, dun dun, just in horns, and dun 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 with the violins, right? And then you have it play a couple little notes here with the horns, and your mock-up is not lying to you. It will be a very prominent note there at the top of the horns, even though it's marked piano, right? And the same thing here. So just watch out. Do you want that irregularity of like the call and response? Because you have the strings so regularly scored, right? You don't really break it up until here, and then the pizzicato at the end. So it's a little bit of a balancing act dramatically. But I really love everything else that you've done here to, you've progressed the material really nicely here. And, and I love the little, ding, ding, ding kind of thing happening here in the glockenspiel. I think that's really strong. Yeah, and then horns answering, strings and trumpet, horns answering, strings, trumpet and horns answering, strings and winds. So you once again, you're progressing the material with the progression of the orchestration, and then winds answered by brass, answered by pizzicato. So this has got to be staccato, right? So that it matches the articulation of the pizzicato. All right. So then going on, whole question, previous approach may be the only workable strategy was my question mark in the evaluation criteria. So here you actually do something different, which I think is very, very nice. Like da-da-da-da octaves, right? That's really cool. And, here you start to repeat some of the strategy that I was really referring to was like the, how do you deal with all the figuration. This is really nice. The strings supporting, along with the clarinet on the top voice. I would just say clarinets on both voices, right? You've got two of them, and you would get a nice even tone here with both of them. And then this can just progress on with the single clarinet. You might even get like a more even timbre here if like after you're finished here, this is taken over by this part here is taken over by your second clarinet, right? But it really does work fine the way that it is right here, with the oboe in here. It will be quite strident though. And then once again, this needs to be rewritten. Full 16th note group ending on a 16th, which is the dovetailing note for the next one, right? Rather than having everything be a little late or a little early, right? This is just, it's more effort. It's more mental effort than the player really needs. If it's done the other way, it'll sound exactly the same way, and it'll be perfectly fine to play. And this is all really lovely right in here. Your horns and a little bit of portato there at the entrance, along with the clarinets and so on. Yeah, that's just very, very cool. And yeah, a little bit of glockenspiel on top. Yeah, and then once again, this can be played on flute with no problem. It might be kind of cool to have this played on flute and like throw in a little bit more glockenspiel, to give it a more of a piccolo kind of a sound, right? But that's kind of tingly sound. Yeah, and so like kind of once again, just like kind of the same thing that you did before. And yeah, just try to have your slurring, your breathing for these players all match up together. Try not to like divide things, and like there's really nothing about these parts on the outside. I guess that they're C octaves, right? But I mean, there's nothing inherently in the music that requires this. I will say one thing about your mock-up is that your bassoon is really, really loud right in here, even though you only go up to like forte in the, it's marked up to forte here, but it's almost like a bassoon like bassoon solo. Uh, this trill right here, I just really wish you had somebody free here in your strings. Let's take a look here, like cellos. Okay, so this is the same pitch as that sounding, right? And this is the same pitch as that. So there's no need for this pitch to be scored in your cellos. It doesn't really do anything, right? So this could be lower divisi cellos, and then you could be upper divisi cellos could be doubling your bassoons, right? And then I think that then this will not get. If you do that, then this trill won't get swallowed up by the timpani. That's always the big question here. And also with just so much going on here in your horns, could also swallow what's going on in the bassoon. So I think it just needs a little bit more support. But otherwise, I like it. I mean, once again, like the whole concern about like gradually expanding out and getting bigger and so on, and involving more and more players in a tutti going towards the end, you would sort of need to develop and progress the energy and the texture, which you don't really do that much. But like you don't choose to do that many tutis or and that once again just kind of brings me back to my point before, is that like maybe this needs a little bit more work on it. Do you know what I mean? Maybe you intend to kind of come back to this and add a few things, adjust a few things, and so on. Try not to do things like this where you've got the clarinet do da da da, and you've got the oboe going da ta 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 ta, and try to make the slurring match. And it just really seems fussy to go, ta 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 ta, and then ta 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 ta. Yeah, it's just try to make everything a lot more even. I mean, you'd be better off just slurring beam groups, right? Ta 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 ta, or just no slurs. Ta 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 ta. Okay. Yeah, but I mean, yeah, I think slurring beam groups is the way to go with the way that you've scored everything here. Yeah, and just a little bit of horn in there. Yeah, so clarinets against oboes, oboe shifting over to flute, coming over the top, dovetailing back to oboe with horn below, and then violins picking up the game, da 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 da, with clarinet below. Right. Yeah. Da da dum. Right. Yeah, and yeah, piano or even or sorry, forte I meant to say. So this is going to be really powerful, sitting on top of this second violin right in here. I just feel like there's no sense in you dropping out the flutes here. I mean, it would be, or the flute here. It'd be better for the flute just to continue on doubling your first violin. I just don't see the purpose of taking it out, because like you've got these other voices supported in the winds to a degree. The clarinet right in here. I see. That is different. Yeah. Right. So yeah. So just in general, I think that your winds could be supporting a little bit more, just on your strings, just so that even just so that it can, this single trumpet note doesn't just take over the strings, right? That's just, anyways. So if I said anything sideways just then, it's the long COVID. It's not me. All right. Right, and then this is really nicely done, I felt. Yeah. Right, and then the little tremolo right in here. Now, I love this da-da-da-da. But I didn't like this dun-dun-dun, because that, once again, distracts from the flow of what's going on the cellos here. This dun-da-da-da-da-da, that's perfectly fine. Yeah. Yeah, and then, this is kind of, it's... there's nothing really wrong here in terms of how you've scored it. I mean, work fine is kind of a small orchestra approach, but I just kind of, it feels once again incomplete. I just wonder whether or not, in terms of just, in order for this to be more of a contrast going back to the development at D, whether or not this could have been more of an expansion outwards, with I mean, certainly, like if you listen to the mock-up, you know, from around here ish, right? It just really sounds very sparse and inconsequential. The first violin part doesn't really start to speak out till around here, and so on. And this just seems to be very dominating the trumpet right in here. I mean, is there any role that the winds could play here? And you know, could they be biting away here? You know, on any of this and supporting it? It just feels incomplete to me in terms of once again like the just you know, and then you know when we're going crunch, 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 we don't even have any brass, right? So it just feels a little incomplete, with respect to the other great work that you did here. Right, and then we're kind of coming back around to the development section. So let's jump back and take a look at that before we finish this. But yeah, but your little dun dun dun. You know, so if we're gonna have this approach here, why can't we have it here? Maybe you forgot to put it in. So even though we looked at this before, let's jump back here to D, and just you know once again look at you know we've got the little disconnected piece of flute. Da da da, bum 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 bum. And but I feel that this works really really nice. The bassoon right in here, da 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 dum, and the you know the this is all pretty much the same. This could be normalized here, the bowing pattern. But yeah, clarinets leading forwards, and then it's pretty much strings. You got a little bit of oboe, and then kind of going forwards here, we just have this little mezzo forte diminuendo chord right here. It's like a little bit of Beethoven color, you know, as much as you're not trying to be like Beethoven. It's not unwelcome, and it doesn't sound off or anything. It doesn't sound random. Right, and then we have just kind of the same basic framing of the opening theme. You know, reminiscent of the opening, I question in my, you know, is this more intimate? Not really. It's just pretty much what it is. But it has a really lovely feel to it, and it's constructed the same way. Da 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 bum bum, and I really love this right in here. It has a lovely, lovely, spooky, kind of, you know, just sudden suspension of where you are. I think that if you're going to push here to a forte, and you're going to have forte and trumpet here, this just sounds so weak. I just it's like what function does it even, what role does it even play, right? If you listen to how pianists choose to interpret this, they almost always just lean on that lower phrase, which is why I really wanted people to listen to how it's performed, because that's part of the, I feel that the pianist's interpretation is really part of the culture, right? It's more, I don't think we can just pick up the score the way it is and ignore some of their solutions and so on. But I just really feel like da 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 dum. I mean, you don't even need the slurs, right? Just like mezzo forte, crescendo, I would say, and then this would all fall. Just try that out. Just try mezzo forte, crescendo, and then see how much this support in the anticipation of pushing forward, to this more urgent kind of vibe, rather than just being this kind of little after or forethought, which doesn't really play much of a role. As I put in my evaluation criteria, more emphasis, question mark. I feel that it really does need that. And then, direct and forceful, da 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 da. Yeah, and you are being aware of the fact that this is interpreted as octaves in the piano part. So we've got that. You've got your trumpet dovetailing into the horn part and so on. And over the violins, but I really do feel like your violins need more weight if they're going to be competing with the horns below or horn and trumpet. So here's where I think you could have doubled this with like your flute at least, right? Or piccolo maybe. This would be a very weak note on piccolo there. Maybe you could double this part on piccolo, da da dum, which is, not the strongest, but it's better than nothing, and then just da 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 being on, say, like clarinet or something, one of your clarinets. Or maybe you could swap functions here. That could be the second, this could be the first, and then the first could go da 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 bum 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 with your first violin. Just something needs to happen here that gives the firsts more strength. And then, da 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 da. That all works really great with the oboes going doo 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 doo. Well, I think you could have kept it in clarinets without hurting anything either. And then that would give you a nice strong partner for the violins. Anyhow, this is really, really cool right here. This da 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 da. And then ding 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 ding. Yeah, and the little glockenspiel interacting with the piccolo and so on. Yeah, that's all really, really cool. And I really love the pizzicato right in here. And then you've got this, all this stuff in here, this back and forth between your cellos and clarinets. I think you could have, like, if you're going to support your cellos here with bassoon, then I think you can support them here too. Okay, I don't think you have to hold off. Just because you added a few notes of support here to the cellos beforehand, it doesn't mean that you can't come in and do it over here too. And then here you just really change the original pattern. Just making everything go da 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 dum instead of da 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 dum, right? And that's okay. It jars a little with my expectations, but that's a good thing sometimes. And I do like the way that you go back and forth between clarinets and middle strings, taking over this accompaniment pattern. That's all very, very fun. And then just touches of horn. There's really, really nice structure to this. But once again, like, you're not building forwards as much as you could, right? Right. You save that for here. Yeah. In the context of the way you build things up here, right? This kind of more heavily rhythmic scoring in this bar, it doesn't. It's not inappropriate. I mean, I'm kind of rethinking it a little bit, but maybe with what follows, it's a bit much, right? So the proportions, I still have a big question mark about the proportions of this bar. But it's still, I mean, it does really sound great, like with the way that it's all scored together. Yeah, I wish you had two bassoons. Maybe this was intended for a specific orchestra that only has one bassoon player. I mean, with these smaller numbers, certainly, it would make it much easier if you were just working with a pocket orchestra, but they probably might not have four horns, right? So, yeah. Da 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 dum, da 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 dum. I was wondering if you could have had tremolo double basses an octave lower than the timpani, just real soft coming in pianissimo, and then boom on the C. That might really help things out in terms of like ramping up the energy. Yeah, and of course, as everybody in the comments has probably already started to, like, if they're watching along with this, like, why didn't Thomas talk about the reharmonization that's going on here and, like, the way he rewrote this? Which, I mean, I think it's very clever, actually. It's very, very fun. It's not really Beethoven. It kind of reminds me a little bit more of, like, Berlioz or Schumann or... I'm thinking forward a little bit, almost something, more that like might see from like Busoni or, kind of much later romantic kind of reinterpreting, trying to get around some of the more predictable nature of this type of cadence in late classical music. Yeah. Yeah, it's just very, very fun. Okay, well, those are my comments for your piece and your entry. And yeah, just I really enjoyed it, Andrew. We've been looking at, I think, there were just several very Beethoven-like entries in a row that really kind of evoked his voice. Even to an extent, Craig's real massive, almost cinematic, romantic kind of interpretation was more strictly toward an idealized Beethoven voice than yours is. I think we really see your personality on this more strongly than anything else, right? Your own particular choices and a lot of that has to do with restraint, right? I feel that you are more restrained than you need to be in a lot of places, and maybe that's a choice. That's like an aesthetic thing. You really don't want to overblow things, or maybe I don't know. Maybe you didn't feel confident about certain things expanding to tutis or whatever. But I do think that you could. I do think you have the craft, right, to go in those directions if you really want to. So good work, well done. I really loved it, and it really brought a smile to my face in a lot of areas. Just I think you came at this with a lot of good humor and a lot of fresh ideas and a lot of personality, and it shows. So really nice. And the hits will keep coming, so stay tuned. The next score is also amazing, and just going down the line, we're going to see a lot of personalities emerging from out of the pages of these works. That may or may not agree with Beethoven's. So stay tuned, and I'll see you soon.